Okay, swell, that's what he says, we're gonna do something else, but at least you've got something upon which to base a decision. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, before I joined FOI, and I'm now in my 20th year at the FOI Commission, I was a journalist. Is that good news or bad news? Anybody want to react to that? How do you get along with the journalists? The reason I share that is I have a little bit of a different perspective. In FOI, I am surrounded by attorneys, legal minds, but sometimes my perspective is a little different because at one point I might have been the person asking your board the question that prompted you to call freedom of information. So sometimes I think a little bit outside of the box to try to get everybody to the same place, which is to follow the law. And I guess the last thing I'll ask, you non-staff people are all volunteers on this board, right? Mm-hmm. So when you go to a local bar or a local restaurant, they give you a big hug with thank you for all you do, right? Thank you for your service. Here's a free drink, free food, right? Is that what happens, right? Yeah, right. A lot of times when I do these sessions at night, people say, Tom, you don't get it. You don't understand. We are volunteers. We signed up to help Shelton. We ran for office to help Shelton. We didn't sign up for this FOI stuff, this ethics, all this. We didn't sign up for that. Well, I get that too. For 10 years in my town, I was on a board. I was the chairman for the last 5, and then got off. And then 2 years later, they pulled me back in to fill somebody's term. So I've been on a town board for a total of 12 years, and I know what it's like to have your real life, your job, whatever else you're doing during the day, then you dash home, you wolf down some dinner, and you come here, and you basically, sometimes it's a second full-time job. If you've got a big application in front of you, I know you could be here all night. I get it. I know how that works. But even if you didn't sign up for freedom of information, it comes with the territory. Fran just kind of mentioned it. It's the law in the state of Connecticut, and it's something that all of us who serve on boards and commissions have to know. And we have to have some idea what our obligations are, but also what our rights are. I'm going to try to give you some of both of those in the time that we have. And I'm also, know that you've got a meeting that starts at 7. I'll cut it off. If you have questions, we can talk afterwards, or you can call me later. But I'm not going to try to run over into your meeting, because again, I know what that's like too. But when we talk about Freedom of Information Act, it's a law that's now 45 years old. It was Ella Grasso's brainchild when she ran for governor for the first time. And if you do the math, 45 years ago puts us right smack in the middle of Watergate. You had a country that was in turmoil, a country that was beset by problems because people didn't, there was communication, there was no talk, there was a lot being done behind closed doors, a lot being done in secret, and the country was almost brought to its knees. And Ella was in Congress when Watergate kind of exploded all around us. She was contemplating this run for governor in 1974, and she said, I think I'm going to do it, but one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I put forward some sort of an open government law. She wasn't quite sure how it would look, and but that was one of her first promises when she ran for governor. And as you know, she ran and she won, and that literally was one of the first things she did. She put forward the concept of an open government law, and she said, this is really important stuff for our state. It's so important, in fact, that I will see to it that it is approved unanimously by our legislature. Have you ever watched the legislature? Right? Can you imagine guaranteeing a unanimous vote on that or on anything? Well, I've seen a video of the vote. There was not a single no vote in the House, not a single no vote in the Senate. This law passed unanimously. It came into being unanimously. Now, other than being interesting, and other than showing us how important it not only was then and how it is now, it's also sort of a reason that we're here tonight. Because if you think about the process, the political process of getting everybody to vote yes on a bill, there had to be a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth, a lot of arm twisting, a lot of, well, I like this, you like that, a lot of negotiation. So we have a law that is based on a pretty simple, easy concept. Has anybody ever tried to read it? Anybody tried to even read a paragraph or two? Your eyes roll to the back of your head, especially if you're not trained legally. The wherefores and the whereases, which leaves those of us who are on the front line in a position where we have to make a call. We have to be able to interpret this law, sometimes on the fly, which brings us back to the reason that we're here, to give you the tools to work with, to answer your questions, so that if you have to decide, gee, should we be in executive session? Is this a document we should withhold? What should we do? You at least have some basis upon which to make that decision, so going forward, you haven't run afoul of the law. And that's the ultimate goal of tonight, to build your comfort level so that when we talk about freedom of information, you're comfortable, and you say, okay, we know what to do, and now we're gonna do the real job that we're here to do, which is to deal with the applications that are before us and work on our plan of development, all those kinds of things. Preliminarily, another thing that I share with people is it's called the Freedom of Information Act, but it's not really about free information. It's about access to two basic things. It's about access to public meetings and access to public records. But have any of you had a situation where someone's come to one of your meetings or come to your office, you're a staff, they come in and they say, under freedom of information, tell me, I need to know. Why did they do this? How did they do that? Where did they come up with the budget number? It happens all the time. People think it's about free information. And we answer questions because we're public servants, but eventually people have to understand that you're part of the process. You have work to do. You need to go to the meeting where it's being discussed, or get copies of the documents where the information is contained. And it's not about an agency sort of regurgitating information to you because you're asking questions. Has anybody ever had that? Is that you in your, yeah, right? Am I right? Right? So just so you know, think about, I feel your pain, think about working at the Freedom of Information Commission. People think that we're the information center for the entire state of Connecticut. On a daily basis, I will answer emails from people who are asking me to send them records. They think that we sit in this giant vault surrounded by all these buttons and vaults and push button, please send me this, please send me that. And I have to write back to them and say, no, we're not a repository for records. You have to write to the agency that has them. People think that we have every record ever created by every agency in the state. In fact, some people say, Tom, stop doing the workshops, go out and tell stories. Do an hour worth of stand-up. It's much more entertaining and people get more out of it. I'll share one with you. A couple weeks ago, true story, guy calls up and he says, I need your help. I said, sir, what's the matter? He says, I need a copy of my naturalization papers. Naturalization papers. I think about it for a minute, I think, isn't that like a federal thing? He says, yeah, I went to the feds, they were gonna charge me $500. I thought you might have an extra copy of mine. I said, true story. So people think that we are, one more. Now this is a little bit of a stretch, but I actually got this email on Monday, December 23rd. Hi Tom, happy holidays. We'd like to order 6 cases of legal size paper. Basic, whatever is at least expensive. Can you send me the price so I can write up a PO? Well, that's not my job either. So you get the, actually, I think she sent it to the wrong Tom, but it's somewhat humorous that people just think we have everything. So again, access to meetings and access to records. When we talk about meetings, and I'll focus mostly on meetings because you folks are our board and you have staff to help you if you have records requests. I'll hit on that just enough, I hope, to give you an idea. But when we talk about meetings, listen to the definition. Meeting means any hearing or other proceeding of a public agency, any convening or assembly of a quorum of a multi-member public agency, and any communication by or to a quorum of a multi-member public agency, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, to discuss or act upon a matter over which the public agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. The bottom line, folks, is here's what you have to think. You have to think in terms of every time we gather to do our work, the tasks that we've been assigned by the city of Shelton or elected to by our peers, it's a meeting. We need to make sure it's properly noticed. We need to make sure it's open to the public. We need to make sure that there are minutes when the meeting is done. A lot of times I'll get this, well, Tom, we needed to have a workshop to talk about budget issues. We didn't want people to come in, so we just sort of gathered informally to talk about it. If it's something that you have jurisdiction over, you can call it a workshop if you want. You can call it, a working group, but it's still a meeting in the eyes of this law. And you want to make sure you've noticed it, that it's open, and there are minutes. Tom, we're going to form a little subcommittee. Subcommittee's going to study some stuff. They're not going to worry about FOI. And every time I hear that, by the way, I get very nervous. Not going to worry about FOI, that means somebody's trying to skirt around it. That's usually a recipe for disaster. But subcommittees are public agencies too. When you read the definition of a public agency, which by the way is what this law applies to, all public agencies in Connecticut, there's a phrase in there that says, including any committee of or created by. So you're a 7-member board. If you create a 3-member subcommittee, there's no quorum, it's not the full board, but that 3-member subcommittee becomes a new public agency that has to follow the same rules. The law talks to us about 3 different kinds of meetings. It talks to us about a regular meeting, a special meeting, and an emergency meeting. Now, the regular meeting is a meeting that you have for a schedule that I hope you submitted to your town clerk by the end of January. And it says we meet on the second Tuesday of every month. You meet once, twice, second, fourth, first and third, whatever that is, town hall, 7 o'clock, library, 8 o'clock, whatever that is, that becomes your regular meeting schedule. The special meeting, a lot of people see that word special and they go, oh God, we can't special. The only thing special about the special meeting is that it's not at your regular time. Not in your regular, slot. You can do anything you need to do at a special meeting. The regular and the special meeting, for both of them, you have to prepare an agenda. I see you've got one here for your meeting. It looks pretty good. They both need to be available at least 24 hours in advance. You have one in your offices and one in the town clerk's office, and you should be fine. Who prepares the agenda? You want to make sure that you think about specificity. The courts have come down pretty hard on sort of vague agenda items, so be as specific as you can, but that's particularly important for the special meeting. The primary difference between the regular and the special meeting is that in the regular meeting, should something come up, tonight's the regular meeting, right? Something come up not on that agenda, one of you can say, I'd like to add that to the agenda, Madam Chairman. I make a motion, seconded. If 2/3 of those of you who are present voting want to do that and vote it, you can add it to the agenda. At a special meeting, you can't. You can't add anything to the agenda of a special meeting. So if you use a template when you make up your agenda, I didn't look at the second page, old business, new business, that's okay for a regular meeting. It's not great, but at least the chairman can say, is there any other business, any old business, and you can vote to add it. But for a special meeting, if you don't have a specific item underneath that, you might as well take that off. You can't say, is there any other business, if it's not specified on the agenda. That sometimes becomes a problem at a special meeting when people in the audience bring something up. And you say, gee, we should probably talk about that. Don't. Say, thank you very much. We'll take your point of view under consideration. Put it on the agenda for next time if you want to talk about it. But don't bring something on that's not on that agenda. That's where people have difficulties with special meetings. Yeah?
I've seen boards notice their special item for a special meeting. Let's say we're going to talk about the topic blue.
Okay.
I've seen boards do it as, okay, there's a special meeting, the topic is blue. They go through the discussion of blue and they vote on it. I've seen other boards say, we're going to talk about blue and we're going to vote on blue. Do you have to make that second distinction?
Make the second distinction? I would say it would probably be wise to do that. Say this and just say discussion and possible action. That way, if you don't do it, there's no issue. One of the words that helps a lot of boards is consideration. Consideration of blue. That's been interpreted to mean, well, you could vote on that if you really want to. It's semantics, but you want to just make sure that you're not letting people think you're only going to discuss. If it says discussion only and then you vote, that's a problem. So if you think there's even a chance that you might vote on the issue, I would consideration, discussion, and possible action. That's how I would handle that.
So the special meeting is something that you just change your time. So if we meet the second Tuesday of the month, and we usually meet on the last Wednesday of the month, which is our special meeting, should that be deemed a regular meeting, or is that still a special meeting?
It doesn't have to be a regular meeting. You don't have it all the time. You have it sometimes. You don't have it.
It's always the second Tuesday of the month.
Okay, it's your regular meeting. And what's the Wednesday meeting?
Usually we have a Wednesday meeting to carry out business that we can get to, public hearings and stuff like that.
Okay, but if for chance you finish it up, you wouldn't have the meeting, right?
Correct.
Then I would leave it as a special meeting. Yes, I would not make it part of your regular schedule.
And if a regular meeting has to be canceled because of weather, something that rescheduled falls into the special meeting.
Okay, there's a but to that. Yes, but. Tonight was the meeting. Big blizzard is coming. This morning, you're looking out the window and you're saying, we can't possibly meet tonight. At that juncture, you can say now the word in the statute makes me crazy because it just doesn't fit my knowledge of meetings. You can adjourn that meeting if you do it to a specific date, place, and time. Now, I don't like the word adjourn. I would like the word move, but the word in the statute is adjourn. So you put a sign on the door that says, Planning and zoning meeting scheduled for Tuesday, January 14th has been adjourned to Thursday, January 16th at 7 p.m. because of the snow. You can do that, and it can remain a regular meeting if you're going to a specified date, place, and time. That's the key. But if you have to cancel it because of weather and you don't know when you're going to reschedule, it goes back to your original point that it becomes a special meeting. So the third kind of meeting that's in the law is one, folks, that I really discourage you from using, the emergency meeting. It's a meeting that's unnoticed, and it's a meeting that you really have to be really certain that is an emergency of the utmost, necessity. Next Tuesday, or next Monday, is Martin Luther King's birthday. Most town halls and city halls around the state are closed. I guarantee you that next Tuesday morning, I will get a phone call from somewhere, somebody in the state, and it'll go something like this: Tom, we've got a problem. What's the problem? Our regular meeting is tonight, Tuesday night, 21st, and I always put the agenda in on Monday, 24 hours in advance. I forgot town hall was closed yesterday. So I put it in this morning. Is that okay? Well, if you do the math, it's not 24 hours. It's not okay. So I say, no, it's not. You should wait. And then I get this: well, we've got way too much to do. And think about accidentally forgetting to notice your meeting tonight. You don't want to, you want to have it, right? We've got way too much to do. I'm calling it an emergency meeting. Oops, I forgot. It's not an emergency. In deference to Fran, in our non-legal minds, it might feel like one. We've got a lot to do. We need to get our work done, but oops, I forgot just doesn't cut it. Always try to wait. An emergency meeting, is a situation where I don't want to get dramatic, but saving people, keeping people out of harm's way. I've gotten calls about, gee, we forgot to submit a grant application, and now the deadline's tomorrow. Can we have an emergency meeting? No, it doesn't. It feels like an emergency, but it really isn't. Short story to show you, how this could snowball into a big problem. People say, what's the big deal? There was an emergency meeting that was held. It's an older story, but it was over in Ridgefield a few years ago, and it involved the assistant fire chief who thought he was about to become the next chief. Got very excited about this, and he was running around town, sort of strutting around, and then he found out that the rumor was actually false. Really upset, really unhappy, and he goes into the first selectman's office, and they had what I'm told was a doozy: screaming, yelling, things getting knocked off desks, cursing, pushing. Finally, the first selectman calms him down. He's known this guy for years. He says, and you're not going to be the next chief, we're going in a different direction. But because you've been here so long, I'm going to make you the interim chief while we look. Guy's not thrilled, fine. But he says, okay, and then he leaves. Well, 169 towns in Connecticut, most of them are small enough, this is going to happen. Boom, the phone starts ringing, the emails, the text, the whole thing. This is terrible, this is horrible. This guy threatened you, he's a danger to you, we got to do something about him. The first selectman ponders all this and says, okay. And so he calls an emergency meeting for the next morning, which is a Saturday morning. He brings his board together, they talk about it, they decide, you know what, the guy's no good, he's fired. They fire him. Now they got to find him and tell him, right? So they go to find him. He was evidently, cleaning his gutters or painting his house or something like that. He looked, with the leaves hanging out of his hair, the whole thing. They drag him down to town hall. Thanks for coming down, you're fired. He gets mad all over again. He's screaming and yelling. He says, you blankety blanks can't fire me, I quit. Blah, 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 storms out. They reconvene the emergency meeting and accept his resignation. Well, end of story? No, because one of the things this law did was create the Freedom of Information Commission. And what the commission is appointed to do is to adjudicate situations where people believe they've been denied the rights that this law gives them. And this guy felt that this meeting was improper, that he should have been notified that this meeting was going to take place, and so he filed a complaint. And we try to mediate complaints. We try to bring people together so that you don't have to go to Hartford for a hearing. Our board doesn't really want to be punitive, it just wants the law to be followed, but this complaint could not be mediated, no way. So he comes, he makes his case, and the hearing officer and the commission hear about it and say, they clearly were trying to do this without telling him. They were trying to do this in secret. And they find for the complainant and invoke one of the board's strongest powers, which is to declare null and void everything that happened at that meeting. Which means basically now that he was either fired and or quit at a meeting that didn't happen. End of story? No, because if you don't like a decision that the FOI Commission renders, you can appeal it. You can appeal it all the way to the state Supreme Court, which is what Ridgefield decided to do. Not sure why, but that's what they did. And in this case, the Supreme Court found in favor of the FOI Commission. That doesn't happen all the time either, by the way, to show you some of the fluid nature of some of these interpretations. But in this case, they did, and they also declared null and void what happened at that meeting. Now, if anybody is familiar with how long that process might take, it wasn't a day or a week, it was 7 years. So what's the problem, guys? Why you go? Back pay. 7 years, back pay. What are they supposed to do? It took them another 2 years to unravel it, all because they didn't wait 24 hours. Is this an extreme example of what could happen if you mess it up? Yeah. But just sort of have that bell go off and say, you know what, let's think about this. Maybe it's better to notice this meeting properly and go forward. We don't need to be in court. We don't need to go to the FOI Commission. Handle it appropriately. If you ever have an emergency situation, you have your meeting, and within 72 hours, you create minutes that reflect what the emergency was, who was there, and what you did about it. Stick only to the topic that is the emergency topic. Your meetings are open to the public. Anybody can come. You know, I probably shouldn't admit this, I guess, but I'm, Valley guy. I was born and raised in Naugatuck. I say, gee, it looks interesting in Shelton tonight. I go down there. You can't kick me out because I'm from Naugatuck. Anybody can come. Ansonia, even Ansonia. Can you imagine? Derby. Ooh. Anyway, no, just kidding. That's what it is in the valley, So, but the idea is anybody can show up. You shouldn't have a sign-up sheet, oh, you're not from town, you can't come in.
What about the public portion of the meeting?
Well, that's the next thing I was gonna say. That's a great question, Madam Chairman. Under freedom of information, believe it or not, you're not required to hear from anybody. If you don't want, now I realize public hearings for land use are a whole different animal, but from an FOI position, nothing in this law requires you to have public comment or public participation. It's entirely up to you. So how long people speak, when they speak, if they speak at all, is in your hands. Most boards have it. Some boards like to control it. Some boards interact with a room full of people. I'm not a fan of that, but that's just me. If you want to hear from people, I think you do want to hear from people here. Let's suppose you're working on amendments to your zoning regulations, and you want to hear from people what they think. That's up to you. But if you want to say, look, we'll listen to you, but you've got 2 minutes. We've got a lot to do tonight. People sometimes they get indignant, a little insulted, but you're absolutely within your rights to do that.
This is the portion of the agenda that's towards the end where we ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to comment on any matter not on the agenda.
Okay.
And sometimes we have one person that will come up, sometimes nobody. That's not talking about our second meeting of the month where we have set a public hearing to discuss a topic, where we let the applicant make his presentation, and then we have the open up to the public for questions to the commission.
Right. Again, that's a different that's a different situation, and there are land use statutes that cover some of that. Ex parte communications and things like that. That's why you have this guy to help you with some of that. But from an FOI standpoint, not required.
You mentioned something about the length.
Sir, identify yourself.
Oh, Bob Sample, Shelton Herald.
Okay.
The length of public meetings, it's entirely up to you.
The public comment.
Public comment.
If the board says, look, folks, we got a lot to do tonight, 3 minutes, that's it,
Okay.
they're entitled to do that.
Well, some towns, and I believe you're one of them, have like a deadline after which you can't continue the meeting. Correct?
We like to
After 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
close the meeting by 10 o'clock.
In Monroe, it used to be 11.
Yeah,
And
that's only within the last couple of years. When I was joining the commission in 2005, we had meetings till 11:30 midnight, and it was crazy, we couldn't function.
I was at a meeting the other day in Wilton, and they were moaning and groaning about that topic. And I expect they're expecting some big outcry about the limits that they want to impose on it, because
It's a matter of managing
there's a lot
what
of
is going to be on the agenda.
You have a right to run your meeting and get your work done, is the key.
That's for the public portion.
Any comment?
Okay.
entire meeting.
So we're talking about making sure you do your work in public. You've all probably heard that there's a couple ways to exclude the public. The legislature tried to create some balance, and one of those is executive session. Remember, folks, that an executive session is not something that sits on an island by itself. It's part of a publicly noticed open meeting. So let's suppose you've got a situation where the only item you have is sort of targeted for executive session. You still need to have an agenda. You still need to notice the meeting the same way you would notice any other meeting. You need to convene it in public. And then you need to vote to go into executive session, citing specifically one of those 5 reasons for executive session. I'm going to go over those in a second. When you state it, you want to make sure it's clear that you're going for one of those reasons. You have to have a 2/3 vote, just like you do to add things to the agenda. And then you go into executive session and you have whatever discussion it is you're going to have. You can stay in as long as you want, there's no limits. But you must come out to vote on whatever you're going to vote on. You cannot ever take action behind closed doors. All votes must be public, all votes must be recorded in the minutes. It must be very clear who voted for what or for whom. Now, the 5 reasons for executive session: a personnel matter, and I'll go back to that one, and also the next one, which is pending claims and pending litigation. A security matter. That one is one that never used to come up. I used to have to try to figure out an example to share with people. Sadly, since Sandy Hook happened in 2012, it's come up a lot. Mostly with boards of education, mostly talking about extra resource officers, bulletproof glass. I did one of these in North Stonington last night, and the superintendent proudly showed me the new school, and he said on the ground floor, and he says, and as you can see here, we have floor to ceiling bulletproof glass. And that's not stuff that we had to deal with when we went to school, but that's commonplace today. And I'm sure they discussed that in an executive session, because on the off chance that the wrong person sitting in the audience, if they discuss it in public, would say, okay, the bulletproof glass is there, we'll have to go, you get what I mean. You want to keep the kids safe. There's an executive session that allows you to discuss property transactions. That's probably not going to apply to this board. You don't buy and sell property, you don't lease property. But if you're ever sort of watching a town board in action, let's suppose the town is going to build a new firehouse somewhere, and it's looking all over the city for land, and it's negotiating with different landowners, studying, drainage, studying all those different things. It could do that behind closed doors, because you wouldn't have to do that in public. If you did it in public, you might undercut the town's position, so you could clearly do that behind closed doors. The 5th reason for the executive session is a little bit broader. It's something of a catch-all. It allows a board or commission to have a conversation about a document or documents that it believes are exempt from disclosure. Let's suppose you ask Fran for a written legal opinion about something. You're just not quite sure what to do. And he writes a legal opinion to you. Okay, P&Z folks, this is what I think you need to do under these circumstances. You are the client. So the document would be covered by the attorney-client privilege. You would not have to share that with the rest of the world. You could go into executive session to discuss the written legal opinion that he's giving you. That's just one example. Now, we're not going to do a lot of in-depth talk about the different exemptions. There are many of them. But if you have a record that's a record you're not sharing with everybody else legitimately, and you need to talk about it amongst yourselves, you could do that behind closed doors. You back up to the personnel executive session. It's important that when you prepare an agenda or when you make a motion, you don't just say executive session personnel matters. The courts have come down pretty hard on that one too. They want you to say more. You don't necessarily have to name the individual. Executive session plan, discussion of a P&Z employee, discussion of a public works employee. I know you don't have a lot of employees under your purview, but let's suppose you were going to talk about giving your zoning enforcement officer a big raise, but it was based on his or her performance. So executive session plan, discussion of the performance of the CEO. You don't have to name the person, but there's only one of them, so so there's some wiggle room, but there's not necessarily that much. To go into executive session to talk about an individual, you have to be careful. You want to make sure you've notified the person in advance, that the person has been given the idea that he or she is going to be talked about behind closed doors. That person then has the right to come forward and say, no, wait a minute, I don't want an executive session on that. I want you to talk about me in public. And if the person does that and insists on that, you cannot go into executive session. Some people get confused about that. They say, wait a minute, I don't get it. I can demand that it be done in front of everybody, but shouldn't I be able to demand to go in the room with them? And the answer to that is no. Once the person has waived that right to have it done in public, It's up to you, the board, whether or not you invite somebody in to an executive session. Now, many times, the board will invite people in to hear their side of the story, to hear evidence, to get testimony. But you're never, as a board, required to invite anybody in. It's up to you. By law, the only people who have a right to be in executive session are members of the board. Anybody else you invite in is entirely up to you because you need them. You need to talk to them. You need to find out, something from them to help you make a decision. The executive session for pending claims and pending litigation is pretty much what it sounds like. You've been sued. I know you've never made a decision that would make anybody unhappy, right? P&Z is easy. I used to cover P&Z. You're trying to do the right thing, and inevitably somebody's unhappy, but you want to talk about your strategies, how to deal with the lawsuit. You could do that behind closed doors. It also allows you to contemplate taking legal action. Now, the city also has a ZBA, right? So you're not the ZBA, you're P&Z, but let's suppose ZBA has a variance request in front of it, and they deny the variance, and damn it, the guy builds the pool anyway, and puts it up right where he wasn't supposed to. Well, ZBA wants to take action to say, look, wait a minute, we told you couldn't do that. How they approach that, their strategy, they could talk about that behind closed doors, taking legal action to try to protect Shelton's rights. You could do that as well behind closed doors. Remember, 5 reasons. Don't just stray into executive session because you think it would be better. That's one of the things that I really get. There are some things that would be much easier to discuss behind closed doors, but if you're going to do it, make sure you've got the right reason, a specific reason, a legal reason, so that you don't get in trouble that way. Any questions about executive session? Does this board have an occasion to go into executive session from time to time? Yeah, okay.
So the agenda for executive session under the heading, if we're gonna go into discussing a lawsuit against us, what would that have to say on the agenda?
Well, if everybody knows that you're gonna talk about it, executive session, discussion of strategy with the Jones lawsuit. But if you think somehow that identifying the Jones lawsuit would compromise your position, you wouldn't have to do that.
Okay.
Executive session discussion of a lawsuit pending against P&Z, and that would be enough.
We've stated it as pending legal matters.
That really isn't enough. You should probably have a little more than that. Again, if identifying the suit, if everybody knows what you're going to talk about, I'd put it on there. But you would never have to compromise your position by putting too much in the motion or on the agenda. So there are 2 paths that boards can follow to exclude the public. That's one. Executive session is the primary one. The next one is one of those that makes doing this, what I'm doing, a little difficult. I read you the definition of a meeting. The sentence that follows that says, meeting does not include. Meeting does not include. If you've ever read it, there's a list of things, many of which sure as heck sound like a meeting. And you would call them a meeting, and I would call them a meeting, but the legislature said, you want to call them a meeting, that's swell, but for the purposes of FOI, they're not. Which means you don't have to notice them. They're not open.